Grüß, willkommen in einem anderen Aufregensvideo. Oh, welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 45 of my figure gaming hobby series. In this case I'll be looking at the Warlord game figures, specifically the 13.5mm figures that they offer in plastic. I remember in the dim past, which probably wasn't that long ago at all, someone commented on Wargamers forum or some site of that nature that there was a new range of plastic Napoleonic figures from Warlord Games. At the time I did not take much notice of this, and remember one issue that was raised in the forum was that these weren't really 15mm, they were actually 13.5mm, and as a result they weren't really compatible or suitable for anyone. Just recently, only several days ago, one of my gaming buddies or friends indicated the price of these figures, that is how much they actually cost. And to put it mildly, compared with metal figures, is very affordable. Because of the cost advantage, I decided to reinvestigate the figures in more detail. Let's compare the figures with other metal figures. The red line represents the point that the eyes of the Warlords Games 13.5mm figures would reside. So you can compare this with all the other figures. As you can see, it's certainly smaller than, let's say, a minifig 15mm figure, but not a great deal. It's noticeable, but I don't consider it a major thing. Nonetheless, the conclusion is you probably wouldn't want to mix these figures with other 15mm figures. This shows the American Civil War 13.5mm figures in more detail. It measures from the bottom of the base and is about 15mm high to the eyes. That is, most people consider that the measurements are from the bottom of the foot to the eyes. Now, of course, the bases here are plastic and they're clearly at least 1mm thick, possibly 1.5mm thick, which brings it down to 13.5. In terms of width, these 10 figures could fit on a 6cm base, which I found quite surprising. I'd probably use 3cm wide bases, so I could use the figures for other rules. This is a very dense formation, and I may consider 4 figures per base rather than 5, but as all the figures seem to be designed to be this close and the bases seem to be joined, then maybe this is the best way to base the figures. The only thing that would initially concern me is painting. I'd have to make sure that I could actually separate the figures to paint them before rejoining together, something I'll need to do when I actually purchase the figure. As a result, the figures do seem interesting, but in terms of the 15mm thing, yeah, okay, they're clearly shorter, but I don't think particularly much. If we swing over to Napoleonics, this shows a 6cm wide base containing 10 figures, each in 2 ranks, which seems to be the recommended basing according to Warlords. Without having the figures in my hot little hands, it's difficult to determine the best method of basing. But before I go down that track, that is 2 ranks, let's just look at how cost effective these figures really are. If they're not that cost effective, then I might as well just stay with my metal figures. Let's initially look at the Waterloo Prussian Starter Pack, which costs $152 US. This is what you get for your $152 US. Let's look at the figures in more detail. Initially, you get 8 mounted brigade commanders, highlighted or shown in the red circles. You get 8 units of Prussian line infantry, 80 figures per unit. This is a total of 640 figures, again in the centre of the red box that you can see slightly to the left. In addition, you also get 5 units of Landwehr infantry, again 80 men per unit, or figures per unit. This is a total of 400 figures, shown in the red box on the right. You also get 2 units of Jager, 80 men per unit, in close order in this case. This is a total of 160 figures. In addition to the close order Jager, you also get 35 skirmishing Jager troops or figures. In the rear of this image you have 5 bases of Landwehr cavalry, each base holding 5 figures for a total of 25 mounted figures. On the right you get 3 bases of Prussian dragoons, each holding 5 figures for a total of 15 figures. You also get 3 bases of Prussian Uhlans, each base holding 5 figures for a total, again, of 15 mounted figures. And last but not least, you have 3 bases of Prussian Hussars, each base holding 5 figures for a total of 15 mounted figures. Moving over to the artillery, I got a little bit confused here, but anyway, you get 2-pounder foot artillery battery, 8 guns with 16 crew by the looks of it. It could be 24 crew, I'm not quite sure. I suspect these are actually 6-pounder guns. I'm not sure if the Prussians had 2-pounders at Waterloo. Maybe they did. Now we get a 6-pounder foot artillery battery, which consists of 3 guns and 6 or possibly 9 crew. I'm not quite sure. I suspect these may be 12-pounder guns if the 2-pounders are actually 6-pounders. Not quite sure. Of course, the piece de resistance, a windmill, which is an MDF scenery piece. I'm actually uncertain what I would do with this. You also get rules and a few other things, which is a nice additional bonus for getting the starter pack. This gives you a total of 1,346 figures at an average cost of 12 cents per figure. This is about 25% the cost of 15mm metal figures and about double the cost of 6mm metal figures. Of course, the true cost depends on how you base your figures. If you use 3cm bases and place 4 infantry figures per base, it's a hell of a lot cheaper. If you go down the 10 infantry figures per base, then it's less than half the cost of 15mm metal figures. Still a lot cheaper, but not as great as you would initially if you base them using the same basing mechanism that you would normally use for 15mm metal figures. A 3cm base with 12 6mm figures would cost about 85 US cents per base, while a 10 by 13.5mm figure base would cost about $1.12. So it's more expensive, but only about an additional 33% more expensive. However, if you reduce the density of your Warlord 13.5mm figures, then you could probably end up with the cost being similar to 6mm metal figures, which is quite extraordinary. We started off with the starter pack, so maybe the starter packs are unusually cheap. Let's look at the individual packets, and when we do so, we do see that the pricing advantage is reduced. This, at $16 for 10 cavalry figures, it's still cheaper than metal figures, but certainly not as much as the starter pack. The infantry seem to represent the better value overall. Unfortunately, the Warlord game website is not very good when it comes to comparing different products. It takes a bit of effort to work out exactly what you get in each of the packets, but I must admit these figures here look very nice indeed. Let's look at some infantry. The British Infantry Brigade has a cost of $42.50 US, and it provides you with 3 commanders, that's mounted for cavalry, 3 guns with crew, and 15 bases of 20 infantry each for a total of 300 foot figures. This has an average cost of 14 cents per figure, which is more expensive than the starter pack and does not include a rules book and a windmill, but nonetheless it's significantly less pricey than metal figure. The conclusion here is the starter pack represents the best value overall, assuming you need that many figures, which is a big question that you need to answer. Let's look at figure ratios in more detail. If the starter packs have an unusual troop ratio, then any saving will be wasted due to basically wastage, figures that you never use. Troop density or ratios do depend on the rules that you use, but let's look at DBMN as an example. A typical 12-point corps consists of 9 infantry elements, 2 cavalry and 2 artillery. An army could have a cavalry corps as well, which does vary in size, but let's assume a large cavalry corps consists of 9 cavalry elements and 3 horse artillery elements. The largest DBN game you would ever consider is 6 corps size units or 96 elements. This is rather large, but other rules can cater for this size far easier. So let's assume it's our target. If we assume 3cm wide bases and 10 figures per infantry base, that is 60 infantry figures per corps. If we assume 2 cavalry per 3cm base, we need 4 cavalry figures and 2 guns obviously for the 2 artillery pieces. Thus the ratios are 90:5:2 for foot, mounted and guns respectively. Let's look at the infantry. Well, each starter pack, specifically the Prussian starter pack, gives us enough infantry for 13 corps, which is double what you really need. If we go to cavalry, there is enough cavalry for 17 corps, which is, triple what you really need. As a result, I'd probably do the cavalry basing or use a cavalry basing of 3 per base. That would reduce it down to 11 corps worth of cavalry, which is still almost double what you really need. When we look at artillery, there is a minimal issue. There's only enough artillery for 5 corps, so this probably would be a major issue. Not every corps would have 2 guns, but a player may need to purchase a packet of artillery. That's a single packet of artillery if they wish to field a large late war army. If you're fielding an early war army, then the artillery ratio is probably perfect, but later in the war, the amount of artillery really skyrocketed. There are enough commanders for 8 corps or 7 corps in a CNC, no issues there. Probably, you could aim for fielding 8 corps, even if you probably would never use 2 of the corps, because let's say one of them could be a cavalry or you could have a different function. But nonetheless, there is a little bit of a mismatch in the number of figures that you need, and it's all on there's too many cavalry and probably too many infantry. Thus, in conclusion, you have a lot of leftover infantry and some leftover cavalry if you purchase a starter pack. There is wastage. I suspect any saving would be negated because you have this level of wastage. However, there is no reason why you can't bypass the starter packs entirely and just purchase the infantry, cavalry and artillery packs as required. It's really a choice up to the individual. One option I thought about is you could buy a starter pack and basically have a Prussian army, and then the excess figures you could use to create a Silesian army or a Bavarian army or something of that nature. So in terms of price performance, these figures give you excellent value. You just have to know what you want and basically select what you need in order to maximise the value. However, there is one downside. Currently, the only figures available at 13.5mm are Epic Battles, Waterloo and American Civil War figures. This means you can field a French, Prussian and British force mix for Napoleonics, but that is it. The American Civil War allows you to field opposing forces, so if that's your preferred period, there are no issues. I also commonly used to use the old Airfix Confederate troops to represent Austrian troops from the from the Austro-Prussian War, for example. So you could even use them for that particular period. But there is a limited number of figures. Saying all that, I am very impressed with these 13.5mm Warlord game figures. I currently have all the 15mm Napoleonic armies that I ever need, so the scale change does offer me some advantages. That is, I don't really need 15mm figures, but the idea of having a slightly smaller figure and basing on 3cm wide bases instead of my current 4cm wide bases does offer me some advantage. It looks like I can use 3cm square bases, maybe even, 2 of which would represent a black powder base in case I ever wanted to play a game of black powder. However, the rules I use use a very different scale, so it's unlikely I would ever use the black powder rules, which incidentally I must point out when I quickly looked through the reviews and what little information I have, are very good rules. It's just you need to want to play at that particular scale. One advantage of 3cm bases, particularly using Warlord figures, is you can really get that mass troop effect. That is a mass troop effect which I currently use 6mm figures to achieve, but the larger figures gives me more detail. I have to admit the painting process will not be as easy, as high troop density means you need to paint a lot of troops. I'll probably use these figures for American Civil War, as I already have too many Napoleonic figures. I really don't need it, and I actually have a 6mm Napoleonic force which uses 3cm bases, so I don't even need it for that. But for American Civil War, yeah, this really does interest me. The low cost of these figures makes refighting these battles more viable than, let's say, with metal. I always avoided going down the American Civil War path because I didn't want to spend a lot of money on metal figures. Now I can do it and spend a lot less, and it becomes more viable. It's probably also easier to paint Civil War figures. And so this concludes my part 45 of my figure gaming hobby series videos, in this case providing my opinion on the Warlord Epics Battles 13.5mm figures. I want to point out that I have no commercial links with Warlords in any way, shape or form. I just did this because this really has excited me. I only wish I knew about these figures before I built out my British and French, etc. force mixes. Alle guten Dingen kommen zu einem Ende.